Hi, this is Drew Jones of Drew's Guitar Shop in Seattle, Washington, and today I have a pretty cool guitar to show you. This is a Jazzmaster that is exclusive to a line of Jazzmasters that is being produced for Chicago Music Exchange, and they're pretty cool and they're pretty unique. Let me go ahead and talk about what I like about this guitar first, and then I'll kind of get into some minor criticisms that I have. So the first thing that you notice about it is it's got this really cool color. This color actually is also done on the headstock, which is really, really slick. This is a good look. I love it. Very, very solid look. The fretwork is all great on it. These frets here have been polished here at the shop, and so they don't necessarily come to you looking like this in particular, but they're, the fretwork that I had on this one was nice and flat and consistent, and I like that. Just the look and the feel of it is very nice. It's got a nice feeling neck. Radius is comfortable on it. And it's got a really neat thing implemented here with the switching, in that it's got a four-way switching system that has both in series and in parallel settings for these two pickups. So you have your bridge and your bridge neck in series, and then you have your neck, and then you have your neck bridge in parallel, which is really cool because that parallel setting is important if you're trying to kind of go for a vintage sound. Parallel would have been more close to what you would have had back in the very, very old days of Fender, when pickups were all kind of like one polarity, basically. So they weren't necessarily meant in cases like the Stratocaster of like working together. That was sort of a thing that came later. Now, I think that that's a really cool thing to implement in this guitar. The parallel setting will give you a much fatter, louder tone than the in-series setting, which is kind of the more standard thing that you see these days. It's not necessarily like a humbucking setting, but it does give you a nice loud sound, and I just love it. It's just very growly and cool. There are, however, some minor criticisms that I do have of this guitar. Number one, when this came in here, I noticed that it had shielding paint kind of on the bottom of the cavity, but it didn't extend all the way to the top, and that the pickguard wasn't entirely shielded. It had some shielding that went down here, but there was really nothing up here, and this is routed for a rhythm circuit up here, but there was nothing up here like really protecting it on the pickguard. And so I don't know necessarily whether or not the lack of shielding was a conscious choice or whether it wasn't, but the thing about that is that with the lack of shielding, you are going to pick up some EM interference with this guitar, which may or may not be a problem. That means like kind of ambient stuff that's floating in the air, things that produce high voltage, radio, microwaves, all that kind of stuff can interfere with EM radiation into your instrument. So that's something that you may not want to have, because that stuff will come through and be amplified in your amp. Now, this guitar here is owned by somebody who's going to be running through a distortion pedal and some overdrive and all kinds of stuff like that. And that kind of stuff can really become kind of a lot, when you're going through those type of effects. That being said, some folks that really like vintage sound really don't like the idea of shielding, because back in the old days, this wouldn't have been so much of a thing. And, older guitars wouldn't have had this going on. And so that EM interference is kind of thought of as just kind of natural as part of the tone of the instrument. Now, I happen to personally disagree with that. When I plug in my guitar, I just want to hear the guitar. I don't want to hear, whatever is going on in the room in terms of like electronics and whatnot. And my feeling on it is that if I want to add something like that, I can do it in post separately and have more control over it. Whereas I don't necessarily have control over the dimmer switches and stuff in my house. So, take that as you will. I think it might be a matter of opinion. Now, what we did here is we went in and we completely shielded this cavity, so this won't have that issue. But it had another electronics issue, which I thought was interesting, and I don't know if it's a problem. So I want to definitely preface this by saying that I don't know how much of a problem this is. Now, when we have it in setting 1 here, we have our bridge on, and we have our neck off. but you hear that crackling, that, like, I don't know, it's like kind of if you were like taking celery on sandpaper or something like that. That is because we have a floating ground situation in this guitar, and that's kind of necessary for this series parallel modification. Basically, you have two leads coming out of each of these pickups. You have a ground side, or side that would normally go to ground, and a side that would normally go to your hot, so your output. But in the cases of doing these kind of modifications where you're doing like series parallel, or you're doing like, you know, phase switching or something like that, that second thing that goes to ground has to be wired to something in your controls, because that is going to affect how that effect is implemented. And the thing is that when we do that here, what we have going on is, so normally you would have a ground coming out, and it would be going to the back of a pod. It'd be going to some kind of grounded surface that goes to your sleeve on your guitar cable, so you don't hear it. It goes to something that goes right into the sleeve, goes right out into the ground, and isn't part of the signal that you hear. Then you have your hot side, which goes to the lugs on your pot, and then ends up going to the tip of your guitar cord, and that's the stuff that ends up going into the amplifier and getting amplified. That's your signal. So in this case, what we have is that your hot is going to the switch on the neck pickup, but your ground is also going to the switch on this neck pickup. And what that creates is a situation where that wire that would normally be connected to a solid real ground is not really connected to a solid real ground, which means that it's a floating ground situation. It's not actually really truly connected to what it should be connected to in order to make it act like it normally would. Now, that being said, you can clearly, in the settings where this pickup is supposed to be active, you clearly get signal, so it works. The only problem with this is when you go down here and you touch these pole pieces. Now, the reason that I kind of want to preface it by saying I don't know if that's a problem is because when you're playing the guitar, you aren't down here like messing with your pole pieces typically. That's not generally how guitars are played. So because you're getting the signal through it, and the crackling only happens when the pole pieces themselves are directly engaged with, I don't know that I necessarily would characterize this as like, a major issue. It's kind of, it seems like it's kind of necessary given the modification that's going on with this guitar. Possibly if somebody sat down and like really thought about it, a creative solution to this might be able to be found. There are numerous varieties of these blade switches out there, and using some kind of creative wiring and soldering, somebody might be able to come up with a way to make this a little bit of a different situation. But I don't know if that's actually possible. I would have to sit down and I would have to think about it, and there are definitely people out there that are smarter than me when it comes to wiring. So take that as you will. Anyway, so that's one of the things. The other thing that I have like a minor gripe about is that the string tree on this guitar is one of these kind of flat doobly-dees here that doesn't have the dimpling down in the middle that would normally help your tremolo stay in tune. It's just one of these straight across little guys, and I think that this is going to cause issues for people who want to use the tremolo a lot, especially on that on that E and the B string. Now, this could also become a string cutting situation at the very extreme. At kind of the more mellow end of the problems that I think could be caused by this would be, just this thing kind of gripping onto the strings and not letting them glide smoothly when you're using the tremolo, which could cause some tuning problems. So we are going to be, while this is in here, replacing this with a little roller tree. I've modified this roller tree by kind of grinding it down a little bit, so it's going to provide more of a break angle over the nut. But this roller is going to move a lot easier than the strings would on this guy down here. Similarly, this is an issue that I think is kind of endemic to all of these Fender offsets, and so like offset, style guitars like these, like the Mustang and whatnot, which is this style of bridge, which I am not a huge fan of. The way that this bridge is designed to work is that it's kind of a rocker bridge. When you engage the tremolo, this bridge kind of rocks back and forth on these little pins, these sharp, these pointed little pins down in these kind of cupish things down here. And so, when you pull back, it goes nyeh. When you pull forward, it goes nyeh. But the thing about that is that it's not necessarily going to return to its original position. And so when we intonate this bridge, and we're moving these saddles to kind of compensate for string tension and whatnot to get the intonation perfectly done, it means that that intonation will stay perfect for exactly as long as the customer stays off of that trem, basically, because as soon as that trem is engaged, it's going to end up over here, it's going to end up over here, and that intonation is going to be a little off. Now, that being said, whether that's a problem to you, I don't know. I'm not you. I can't make decisions for you. But it is a thing with these rocker bridges. I've never really been a fan. If you can find a version of this bridge or any other kind of rocker bridge that has rollers on it, I would highly recommend personally replacing it with a roller bridge, just because the rollers don't really move. Your intonation stays put, and on top of that, the strings are able to glide over those rollers a lot easier than they are over these saddles and, with this rocking business going on. One of the other things I don't like about many styles of this bridge are that this intonation screw, this screw down here that you move the saddle back and forth with, it's right underneath the string. And that can cause a lot of problems during setup when you're raising or lowering these saddles, in that sometimes that screw tip will kind of rise and it'll come in contact with the bottom of the string. And in some cases, depending on what's going on with the neck, depending on what's going on with the setup or whatever, it requires shortening these screws or doing some kind of other workaround to not have that happen, which is kind of not the greatest, in my opinion. And one of the other issues with these bridges that I've encountered a lot, and it's no exception on this bridge, as you can see, is that these height screws kind of do slip around a little bit. And so one of the things I'm going to be doing while this guitar is in here is I'm going to be dropping some blue thread locker on all of these, not a really heavy coating of it, but just enough to kind of keep these in place after I've worked on the radius and set the height and everything, because I don't want these moving around on the customer. And I've seen this issue on a number of this particular type of bridge. Now, all of this stuff being said, there are different options out there for you. You can get a thing called the Mastery Bridge. There's probably other third-party companies out there that make really, really decent retrofits that have rollers, that have a better design as far as the intonation and everything else. So, if you do get one of these guitars and you do want to replace this, there are options out there for you. This here, though, would be kind of the, standard if you were looking for that original look. And if you were looking for maybe that, a little bit of warbliness when when the intonation goes a little flat, goes a little sharp, like I said, that's a matter of opinion. I don't know if it's a problem for you. It's a thing. It's a thing I thought I'd point out here. Past these things here, like, the bridge, the shielding, the crackling here, and the string tree, I really, really love this guitar. This is all really minor stuff to do to a guitar when you get it. Generally speaking, like when I get a new electric, or oftentimes when one of my customers gets an electric, the very first thing that happens with it is it comes into this shop, it gets shielded, it gets a bridge modification or something like that, and we put roller trees on it and everything else. These are generally things that, a shop is going to do for you, when you buy the guitar, if you want things to maybe be dialed in a little bit better. but you know, this guitar as it comes out of the factory will work for you. There's nothing wrong with any of the hardware on it in terms of like basic pure functionality. They're minor complaints, and I just figured I'd throw them out there. Otherwise, like I said, I love this thing. The color, the feel of it, this implementation of this four-way switching, which, by the way, one thing I'll mention about it, I love the way that they did it with this four-way blade switch, because this kind of modification a lot of times is done with like a push-pull pot, or it's done with like a mini switch or something like that. And that stuff can get really complicated really quick when you're trying to like figure out intuitively what your pickups are doing. This is super intuitive, and it is just kind of in there as kind of another standard voice for your pickups, which is great. When I have a guitar, I want all the voices for all the pickups. Like, I want to have all of the options available to me, and this gives that without having a whole bunch of stuff all over the, all over the guitar, and intuitively implemented in that it's just this four-way. So you're just like, it's easy to manipulate when you're not really thinking about it too hard, which is really important when you're performing. And again, the fretwork is good. I cannot express how much that matters, because the thing about a lot of guitars these days, and I'm talking like mid-range stuff and even sometimes some high-end stuff, the fretwork is a little off. Now, if you've got like a high fret on here, or, several high frets or something like that going on, and it necessitates going in there and doing like a level crown and polish, or at the very least doing some fretwork, which is never cheap. Like, that is just so wonderful to see the quality of fretwork that I see on here, and they even just feel nice, which is wonderful. I kind of nerd out about frets, and so this is a big deal to me. And the setup on it was pretty good when it came in. So I'm not actually I wouldn't have really needed to mess with the setup all that much if I wasn't pulling all those screws out and doing the Loctite thing. And this look with the headstock is just great. Also, good quality tuners on this thing, which quality tuners are just, they're wonderful. Generally speaking, when you're working with a guitar that's got any kind of corners cut, the tuners are one of the areas that are first to go, and it's one of the things that you are touching and manipulating the most frequently on that instrument. And if you have tuners that don't work very well, that is just, it makes playing that guitar a much less pleasant experience. You shouldn't even think about these when you're using them, and these are the type of tuners that you don't think about. So, like I said, minor critiques of this guitar. Otherwise, I just love it. These guitars come in a bunch of different custom colors. So this one here is this kind of avocado green. There's like some peaches and some other colors that you can check out. Go to Chicago Music Exchange's website. I'm not being paid by them or anything, but I'm a fan of this. This is cool. So, go over there, check them out. And if you're looking for something that has that vintagey look, but is unique and cool and has some neat switching going on, this is a really, really cool guitar to maybe consider. I love it, and I felt compelled to do this video just because, again, even though I have some minor critiques of this guitar, I think that this is really well done, and I think that they did a pretty good job with this. So anyway, this is Drew Jones of Drew's Guitar Shop in Seattle, Washington. If you liked this video, please consider linking it around to some friends, especially if you have some friends considering buying something like this. Link them this video. And down in the description of the video, you'll find a link to my Patreon and my Ko-Fi. If you feel like you want to kick me a few bucks as a tip, that always helps me out. There's also a link down there to my Reverb page where I sell some stuff, and a link to my website where you can find my pricing info for the repair work that I do, as well as my contact information and a page that I wrote up on caring for stringed instruments. Also on that website, you will find a big article that I just got done working on a few months ago that is basically everything you could possibly want to know about frets. Going fretless, compound radius, stainless steel, gold Evo, everything you could possibly want to know. And if you find something on there that I don't have you know, talked about in that article, please contact me. Let me know what the question is, and I'm going to add that to that article because I want it to be as thorough as possible. In the future, I might be adding some electronics stuff to my website, or I might be doing that through Patreon. I'm not quite sure yet. It might be a little bit of both. But you know, just keep that in mind for the near future. And for the time being, I hope that you all enjoyed this video. Very cool guitar. This has been Drew Jones of Drew's Guitar Shop in Seattle, Washington. Thank you for watching.